In keeping with one of the main themes of this channel, I want to go ahead and share with you yet another mistake that I made in my younger years and kind of what I learned from that. And it was more or less just blindly following the advice of others while largely ignoring my own instincts. And I made a lot of mistakes as a result of that because there isn't really a scientific basis behind the advice that other people give you. They just kind of say, hey, it worked for me, so it should work for you. But the reality is that every situation is different. Every relationship's different. You've got to account for all those variables, like how long you've known somebody, how long you've been part of an organization, what your qualifications are, how you feel, who you are, all those things. But perhaps more importantly, if you're just enacting something, regardless of whether you agree with it, and you're just doing it because somebody else told you to, you're going to come across as very inauthentic, very uncalibrated. It's just going to be kind of weird and awkward. And people can see through that. And not to mention the fact that when people are giving you advice, it's very easy for them to tell you to do stuff because they don't have to deal with the consequences. Only you do. So you can make bold claims all day when you're uninvested and uninvolved in something, but you're the one that's going to have to deal with that. So that's very important to keep in mind. So let me give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about here. So back in high school, I had a crush on a girl, and I didn't really carry myself properly throughout the entire process of trying to win her over, and it didn't work out for obvious reasons. And so I remember there was one time that I was asking somebody for advice, and they basically goaded me into asking her out on a date. And to me, it didn't really feel right. So again, going back to those instincts, I just couldn't quite put it into words, and I didn't really want to do that. But again, at that time, I didn't know what I was doing in life, and so I just kind of blindly followed that advice. And what ended up happening was it was just very uncalibrated. It was very awkward and weird when I did it. I just kind of grabbed her by the arms like, hey, would you want to go out with me this weekend? And rightfully so, she turned me down. Whereas if I had followed my instincts, then I probably would have at least taken a little bit more time to move us towards that direction naturally and in an unthreatening way. But again, I didn't do that, and so I got myself into trouble. Another example would be some of the lessons that we had hounded into us as we were on our path to commissioning towards becoming Army officers, and then some of the training that followed after that. So some of the very common advice that I remember receiving and some of the lessons that were drilled into us were the fact that you should always trust your NCOs, always listen to your soldiers and your subordinates, and don't think that because you're the officer and you're in charge that you're always right. To an extent, that is true, but they overemphasized that advice, and I just blindly followed it yet again. And so when I got to my unit as a platoon leader, I kind of just let everybody get away with whatever they wanted because I was told, hey, the NCOs and the soldiers are always right. But they developed egos, they developed laziness and disrespect because they knew that I wasn't going to stand up and say anything if I thought something was wrong. Which again, that's what my instincts were telling me to do, is I think something's wrong and I want to stand up and speak out against it, but everybody's telling me I can't. Right? Whereas if I had followed my own instincts, then I wouldn't have gotten into as much trouble as I did in that case. Yet another example, I talked about a friend of mine who is going through a breakup in one of my recent videos, and him and I were just talking the other day. He was looking up an article online about this is how long it takes to get over a breakup, and I couldn't help but respond to that with, it's not an online article's business to tell you how you're supposed to feel. How you feel is how you feel. It takes you as long as it does, or as short as it does, for you to get over a breakup. But if you're just letting something else tell you how you're supposed to feel, then what's going to end up happening, you're probably going to feel weird or out of place because you aren't getting over it as quick as you're supposed to. You might even go forward into another relationship and try to force yourself to put on a happy face, and then that'll come across as inauthentic, and the person will pick up on the fact that you're going against your natural grain. Now, the solution to all this, I would say, is whenever you go to do something, it should always be on the basis of it feels right to you. So that means that you still can listen to other people's advice. You just have to make sure you take it with a grain of salt. Think about it for a second and decide whether you agree on it or not and why. And then, integrate that into your own thought process, your own instincts, and go forth and experiment with things. And the very important caveat here is that you're not always going to be right just because you're following your own instincts. You're still going to make mistakes, but at least you're not going to come across as inauthentic, and you're going to understand why you're doing what you're doing. And so when you do make those mistakes, you can look back and learn from them and kind of compare and contrast the reality with how you thought things were going to pan out. And that's going to be much more credible in your mind when you're referring to it and reflecting on it and deciding how you're going to adjust in the future. So I hope that helps, and let me know if it didn't make any sense, and I'll see you in the next video.